On today's episode of WatchJRGo, we are back with my very rad 1987 Corvette that for some reason doesn't want to keep running. So today, we're going to try to solve that problem. What is going on, guys? I am WatchJRGo, and today, like I said, we are back with the cheap 1987 C4 Corvette that we bought at a garage sale for just $3,800. And, of course, we got it running pretty quick. It just needed a fuel pump, so $100 at O'Reilly's, and we were back on the road with this very rad car. And we've been out driving it, but it keeps struggling. And you guys already know why it's struggling if you watch the other videos, because it's missing a very important piece of the puzzle. And that is what lets it meter the air going into the engine. So engine control systems love to know how much air is entering the engine through the intake, and they use something called a mass airflow meter, which is right there. You can see it even says MAF right on it. So this is a replacement from Bosch right there. And this thing has a bit of a problem, and the problem's not that baling wire wrapped around the air filter housing. I know all that looks crazy, and the fact that they chrome spray painted the air cleaner housing, also crazy. But on this car, it's this. This is the bridge that connects the MAF to the intake itself. And if you look at that, well, you can see that it's not exactly fitting on there correctly. Now, this is a piece that's commonly broken on many cars and causes them to run horribly. You might not even think yours is broken, but a mechanic will go take a look at it and figure out, after a little bit of diagnosing, that it's very broken, because they're typically plastic or rubber, and that plastic or rubber ages, rots out, it gets movement stress from, you know, the intake usually being fixed to the car, the air filter housing being fixed to the car, and the engine moving around as you come on and off throttle. So those pieces are always moving around, and over time, well, things can go bad there. This happened on one of Hoovie's cars. Jake was out driving it one day. It was, I think, his old clown shoe, something like that. It was a Z3 or a Z4, and Jake called me one day and was like, Hoovie's car is dead at Walmart. I made it here, can you come save me? So I grabbed the Autel, went over there, scanned it. We had misfires on every cylinder, and what had happened, of course, was the MAF is in front of that intake bridge or the boot that connects the MAF to the engine itself, and the engine was getting it way more air through the actual, you know, the mechanical part of the engine than the electronics could account for. So when you end up with a hole in that boot, or the boot's disconnected or anything like that, the engine thinks the amount of air coming in is what it's metering at the mass airflow sensor, but what it's actually getting is it's essentially open to atmosphere. And if it's open at all, the atmosphere is exerting 14 pounds of pressure onto that intake system, so it's basically just forcing air in through that. So there's plenty of air, even if the gap is tiny, that just ruins everything. So obviously, one of my first diagnostic steps on any car is just disconnect the MAF, right? It doesn't matter. I know people come in here disagreeing with me all the time, saying the engines won't run without their MAFs. I think once it was true, and even then I think that I was just testing it poorly. There are always base tables in the ECU, and when it can't find its sensors, the ECU will run on the base tables as long as it has something. If a modern fuel-injected engine can even get a crank signal, it can run. It's usually no big deal to run without basically all of its sensors. It can even live without its wide bands. ECUs are incredibly resilient. Cars are built to get you home at all costs. So if you've got a sensor that's flaking out like a MAF, just go unplug it. The thing will probably make it home, no problem. Now there might be exceptions to that rule, but right now the ECUs are batting 99% for me. I don't know if that's how you gauge batters, but that's how much baseball I watch. These things are designed to get you home. This has the same problem Hoovie's BMW had, and it's just even worse and more hacky. If we look at that intake bridge from this side, you can see that huge gap right there, right in front of the tune port injection plate. And even this can't seal properly, because what's a worm clamp supposed to do when it has to clamp down what is HVAC duct that's not meant to fit this at all onto, you know, a weird shape. It's not a circle, it's this giant oval, and of course it tapers to an actual circle. So none of this works at all. And apparently the old owner had been driving it like this. And this explains why she likes to start up and then falter. And also the car won't do donuts. That's the main problem we're trying to solve here, right? Every time I go to do a donut, it dies. And you can try to stay in the throttle and get it right, but it just dies every time. About 3/4 donut, the engine just cuts. Now, C4s actually are notorious for this. You can throw them into corners and they'll die. The track prep C4s, they throw away the entire gas tank and they put it on a real fuel system. But the problem with C4s is there's no baffles in the gas tank. So once you start doing a donut or really hard cornering, all the fuel sloshes to one side. I think it actually does have 2 baffles, but it still sloshes all to one side and the thing will just die on you. So really the donuts, it's more of a joke. It's not really a problem. I'm just playing around, but I do wish it would do a full donut. But I'd say 50% of my problem is this guy and 50% of my problem is the fuel tank. So let's start by repairing that intake bridge. I ordered one of these. I think it's made on Australia. I think it might have ended up shipping from here in the US. I dropped it. But I'm pretty sure on eBay it said Aus 1891 and it was the only place that actually had this intake boot. Now these are repops. Obviously nobody makes them anymore. This car is an antique and that's kind of one of the problems that you have when you start working on antiques. There we go. Doesn't that look better? It's actually meant to fit the car. It can move around. Let's get this junk off. Get this thing in there. I'm gonna reuse those clamps because I like that they're black anodized worm clamps. That's kind of rare to see. And maybe this thing runs amazing after that. The battery charger's on this thing. One of my friends was over here the other day and he was like, well, what's going on with that Corvette? And I was like, it's perfect, start it up. Go just enjoy it. Well, he did exactly that. Started it up, gave it a couple of revs, shut it back down, and I came out later that night and the battery was 100% dead. So I was like, man, what'd you do? But I realized that it's old and the ignition's really no good. So he turned it off and pulled the key out, but the switch wasn't actually all the way off. It was just right, you know, right in front of all the way off. So the key off would be right there and the ignition was kind of hanging right there. It's pretty common on old GM cars where the ignitions are worn out. So it's not his fault it died, but it is the reason that I've got it on a charger right now. I think the best way to do this, instead of trying to disconnect the mat from the air filter, is simply unscrew this air filter housing from the top of the radiator here. These little knobs just screw onto some posts. They're not even very good. They just, I think you basically just force the plastic on. All the threads are intact, but it's not the best layout. There we go. This is absolutely terrible. I would have given them some credit if they took a bicycle tire tube and cut it up and used it as a way to stop air from going around this. That's probably the best way to do it. Bicycle tire tubes solve most of life's problems. It's the perfect rubber to use for engine issues, air leaks. You wrap some bicycle tire tube in duct tape, it's gonna go a long way every time. Oh, this thing is sharp, dangerously sharp. They were trying to kill me right there. It even leaks right there. It leaks everywhere. You think half that rivet went in the engine? Who knows? I'm not against making it work so you can get home, but I would assume that this $80 piece of rubber is the reason the owner hadn't driven it for like 4 years. It probably sat, killed the fuel pump, everything was rotting out just because it wouldn't run correctly since it couldn't meter the air. All right, we have to get all this reconnected. Oh, it fits so nice. We'll never know what happened to the other side of that rivet because there's not a thing in the throttle body here. Throttle body's actually really nice. It's got this cool Venturi design. Good work, GM. We'll give you some credit there. Good work. Another thing to look for if you ever have a problem where you're not metering air correctly and maybe somebody just worked on the air cleaner or the intake boot or anything like that, make sure it actually went back on to the intake. Because a lot of times when they have rubber boots, the rubber folds up and it's a leak that's on the bottom where it was too hard for somebody to actually get in there and see, and they just left it. So you might end up with like a BMW with a real math problem, and it was just because somebody didn't go back in there and look for a leak underneath the intake. So you'll find out real quickly with a smoke machine, but other than that, you better get an inspection camera in there if you're gonna try to find these problems. All right, this is the last of our intake setup here, which hopefully fixes the engine. Calling that a W right there. Now, some of you may notice the other problem that I needed to fix, and it's this headlight right here. It was being a pain it flipped over. The passenger headlight was working perfectly, and the driver one started flaking out on me. Now, once my buddy ran that battery dead the other day, I can't even be mad at him because I got back in, jumped it, and the headlight flipped back over. So that was a win. Let's see what happens now. Nope. That motor quit. So I actually think this is a new motor. I've mentioned that before. It looks very nice, but the problem here is it doesn't work. Obviously, that's a bit of a problem. So this is the headlight motor and the actual headlight connection from what I can tell. And they've got it zip tied together. This connection is the hood light. I shut it off because I didn't want it running the battery dead. So I just popped that one apart. And then I think right here, in this box right here, this is the actual headlight control unit on the C4. So in that little box, there's 3 relays. One tells the headlights to flip over, so it might not be a motor problem after all. And the other 2 relays left in that box control the headlights individually. So there's 1 relay for passenger, 1 relay for driver, and I bet they also control the high beams, if I had to guess. Ah, look at that. These wires right here are the actual lights, because the lights work perfectly. And they run into this, which is zip tied right there. And that runs into this harness right here, which now has me worried. Oh no, there's a bunch of wires. Yeah, all these wires go into this box right here. So all those wires go into the main loom, go over, and then come back to pick up that box right there. That's the headlight motor and light control. But this is motor, and this is light. And none of it looks amazing. They're all old weather pack connectors that are trying to come apart, but I don't think the connector is the problem here, because this motor, when it was running after we jumped it, even seemed a bit flaky. And I'm also kind of thinking it could be a wire that's just worn somewhere. Maybe opening and closing the hood a bunch has caused the wires going to that driver's side motor to wear out. I also just noticed this thing has hood struts, and it needs new ones. It really needs new ones. It's got this great hood prop, but the hood struts in there must be completely worn out, because when you open this hood, it takes all of your strength. It's incredibly heavy. So if I bought those 2 hood struts right there, it'd probably solve most of my problem. Well, let's see if we fix the first problem. Does it run, and is it charging? Only 11 volts. She's charging. 14.3. Hey! Well, the throttle seems more responsive now. Before, it had problems coming off idle. There was always a hesitation. Felt really good right there. Obviously, we still have a bunch of old gas in the tank. And I did plan on giving it the old 44K, the full BG treatment, honestly. We'll do an oil change on this, EPR, MOA, and 44K. But to start with, I'm putting the 44K in right now so we can clean up those fuel injectors. Go, 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 go. So now we're on to one of the final Corvette problems here, and that is the dash is falling apart. And obviously, let's see, so 1 screw is still holding it in here. Barely, just barely. Somebody has thrown like wood screws in here onto this panel, which is fine. I'm not against the wood screws holding it on, but the problem is the flat dash. I'm pretty sure they all had flat dashes for a long time, but then after the facelift in the 90s, they got this thing. I don't really think this thing needs to be here. Look how far that thing sticks out into the cabin. It's not even an airbag, it's just like a bump pad in case you run into it. Actually, it kind of looks like it did have an airbag in the later ones. Look at that. Doesn't that look like an airbag connector hole that they just covered up? Very interesting. I was thinking about going ahead and installing this, but this really doesn't even fit. I don't think there's a way to install this. It's clearly got aftermarket brackets and stuff. I really think the only thing you can do is put the screws back in this and just leave it alone, because there's no access to these upper brackets once it's actually in here. You'd have to tear everything apart, and I don't remember if this even comes off easily, this carpet piece down here. where the knee bolster is. So I really think the correct answer is just put the screws back in this panel so it sits correctly and call it done, because that's how it came from the factory.
Welcome home. Begin systems check. I will need you to respond, please.
First long drive I've had this thing out on. I just put 20 miles on it. For a bit there, we had a crazy, like a little bit of a shuddery vibration out of the rear. I'm sure the tires were just flat spotted, and now it's perfect. It actually feels amazing. You can see that I'm on a mission to buy some old game consoles, because that's what we just picked up in the back all the way across town. So I'm headed to buy one more game for the Tech Throwback channel, just because it was a crazy deal. And then we're taking this thing home. And it's doing absolutely awesome. If I had one more hand, I'd downshift and hammer it, because it'll rip. Woo, look at that 2013 Avalanche, baby. She's a black diamond. You don't see too many of those things. Driving the C4 into the sunset, now that's pretty rad. As you guys know, C4's the wedge always looks incredible with those beautiful pink, yellow, purple sunsets. It's literally like the cover of GTA, and it was a fun night taking this thing out for a quick drive. And it ran great the whole time. Amazing, actually. Still a good car. That is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to head on over to shop WatchJRGo.com for cool shirts, not like this. And please like, share, subscribe, do whatever you want to do, and I will talk to you next time. You guys know the drill. We got one final test, see if it finally works. It did one full donut and died. Perfect. One full donut is pretty good. That's more than twice the amount of donut we were getting before, and it was a great donut. So I'm giving it some credit. As soon as I got back to the house though, headlight quit on me. The lights work great, but this one just doesn't want to flip over. So I do think it's a very, very bespoke relay. This relay has like 6 different terminals, and it's made to work with like the timing system that flips the headlights forward and back. There's a little bit of logic in them, not much. I think it's just a couple of relays that pull it all off. But unfortunately, I do think I'm gonna have to pick up that relay to get this thing just absolutely perfect and ready to be reliable. Even when I stopped, because I just drove it around for like an hour and a half, I left the lights on, not the headlights on, but the lights in the first position, because then it won't ask to flip the headlights over, because I knew if it did flip over, it might not come back, and that's not a situation you want to be in. So I had to let it sit there and ding with the tail lights on and the headlights themselves turned off. Oh well, she's getting closer. And she sure is rad.